Yes, thank you, Nathaniel, and all those who organized. And in a way, when Nathaniel presented the idea, I had a feeling that it would be good if Ita Wegman is part of this kind of focusing on Dunlop, because this was a very deep relationship, and the kind of expression is maybe also shocking for some of you, is that we have the death mask of Daniel Dunlop. I once got it from Great Britain. Somebody discovered, it was, I think, in Park Edward Clinic, that underneath there is a sign, private property of Ita Wegman. So they offered the death mask to the Ita Wegman estate and archive, and it came back. And the reason why, I will start soon my presentation with it, but the last remark as introduction, as Nathaniel said in a private conversation to me, that he's not sure if ever before there was a focusing on Daniel Dunlop since he died here on the hill, here in the Carpentry Hall. I think there was no. He was excluded from the Anthroposophical Society in April 35, and he left Earth on the day of Ascension, 30th of May, so 6 weeks later. And he was one of them really brought out of the society. Very tragic, not our main theme, hopefully, tonight or in my presentation. But since then, it was a huge silence around him, also partly in Great Britain. It was surprising that by the book of Thomas Meyer, who was published in the late 80s, a person as Owen Barfield came to know Daniel Dunlop in a deeper aspect, he said in the afterword, in the epilogue of the book. He knew him a little bit, but by the book, by the research, the statue, the spiritual statue became clearer. And now we are approaching 25. In Dornach, it's a very special day, isn't it, for 100 years Dr. Steiner's death. And Daniel Dunlop will be then 90 years in the spiritual world, in his real home world. So 3 times a Saturn rhythm. And I thought it's very wonderful that we focus now on him. I know that the main essence of the conference is not a biographical one, of course. The leading thoughts for a new economy, but the start was with Daniel Dunlop. And the death mask is probably here because Ita Wegman, when she heard that he is acute, severely ill, and this was on the late evening of the 28th of May, 35, she left Arlesheim at midnight to go to England to see him, to save his life. And she succeeded in seeing him in the hospital twice, but she was not allowed to do something as a doctor. So she could come and accompany partly, but she couldn't support in a physical way. And then, I don't know exactly when, but maybe 10 days later, it was not for the cremation, it was later, she gave a certain address about him. And we have in the archive the manuscript, and she talked about this absolutely surprising going or dying, and she started this little address in saying, it is not to believe that he has gone away. I think that it was in Steiner House, because she's saying there is the chair where he was always sitting, and now it's empty, and it's unbelievable. So she started like this, and then she was talking about what she experienced, and also about the face. And I don't think that Ita Wegman was a person with a close affinity to death masks. I think this was not at all her. And some of you, as me, are not familiar with death masks. And sometimes I ask myself, why? But maybe this was a very special situation because she said she was unbelievably touched by this transformation of the face. And Ita Wegman, for those of you who don't know, she was a well-experienced doctor. And at this time, she was accompanying patients since decades. And of course, a lot of them also died, aged, or with cancer diseases. So she was really well experienced in this region of the threshold. But what she perceived there was so incredibly for her that she maybe asked for a mask, but maybe it came also from the family or from other persons. And she said in the memorial, this face took the traces of his individual being. It showed the imprint of the spirit, so as it was true without the influence of nationality and education or the mark of daily struggle life. The face was like an Offenbarung, revelation, but in the manuscript she's using the German terminus. And I must tell you that it was as if it sounded from out his head, and the sound was T-A-O. And the picture came as if this face belonged to a man who has listened to the Offenbarungen, revelations of the Great Spirit, making the impression to be one with what is behind nature. And in this memorial address, she said this experience remembered her to some sentences of Dr. Steiner directed to her, that it is the task of Daniel Dunlop to teach about cosmic things, and that he has old Western knowledge. So for her it was a mystery, this face and the riddle behind. And she also said, and maybe this is also good for my lecture presentation, nobody can say that he has known Dunlop as he really was. It was always only one side of his being he shows. The other sides were hidden. So it is not so easy to make just a biographical approach to Dunlop or Dunlop and Ita Wegman, even if they were close together from the correspondence 13 years. So the first letter from Dunlop coming to Ita Wegman was in the autumn of 1922, and the last one, were in springtime 35. And I've read them all preparing my presentation. It's handwritten, not so easy, especially his handwriting sometimes. So it's quite a document. And it wasn't, I don't think that it was researched before, but it's only part of the life. I mean, the traces in correspondences or in emails today, and the real life, it's probably not the same. And it's not so easy to ask yourself what was Ita Wegman's relationship to Daniel Dunlop, what she really knew about him. So she had this impression when he died, or the transformation of the mask, hidden. Of course, she knew what we heard at the beginning and is in the big booklet described about the World Power Conference. And I think she must have been absolutely interested that in this July 24, which was an important year for the beginning here after the Christmas conference, that Dunlop arranged this conference in London. We heard about it, you know about it, 40 countries and delegates from all over the world, and in fact, the first international conference after the war. It's good to almost to meditate on it, that he was the man who brought them together, including the Germans. Including the Germans, they were all excluded, and including the German language as one of the official languages of the conference. I'm not very keen on it, so I decided also to give the English presentation tonight. But as a matter of historical fact, he said it is necessary to include this. Absolutely, with a feeling for reality, he said, and with a sense of justice. So, and this will be a big topic in those days, and maybe talking about the conference, but the main question is the future, of course. But it was something that he was able to organize, that the Times was reporting daily. And when Daniel Dunlop died, the Times also wrote about him and wrote in this obituary, not many years after the war, he, Dunlop, conceived the idea that the engineers and the scientists whose inventions had been so powerful in destruction should lend their great talents in the rebuilding of the world. The transformation of a profession, we can say, it's this tragic collaboration between intelligence and evil. Steiner said in 1990, this will be the most dangerous coalition of the future between intelligence and evil. And therefore we need a Waldorf school, by the way, he said, to prepare another coalition union between hard forces and intelligence. Because what will coming is this one. And yeah, so I think my perspective is Ita Wegman. She knew very well about it, but it's not part of the correspondence. So unfortunately, I could not find any letters about that she perceived or commented even, but of course, and also as a doctor, she was deeply touched. And we have also essays by her, the future of the earth in the sense of ecology. So the mystery of the earth was an article of Ita Wegman out of the 1920s. She's talking about climate change and a new responsibility for the earth as a whole. So these were topics of her, and of course for her it must be so moving that Dunlop created a conference, but also encouraged during the conference to create an overview, a kind of survey of all the energy on the planet, the power resources of the world. And there was a huge study over years, and the report was published in 1929 with his foreword about saying the power resources of the world. And this problem, how to deal with it, can only be solved by an attitude of brotherhood. That's what he was saying, and that's what also Nathaniel touched. I mean, we are coming to these sentences or truth or insights of Dunlop 100 years later on quite an existential level. So I think Ita Wegman, of course, was deeply interested, but I can't prove it by letters. And then he came closer to this place. And Salvatore Lavecchia is quoting it in his article that in 26, 2 years later, there was a World Power Conference in Basel. It was not totally global, but it was a partial conference, but also 600 delegates, 40 countries, and the chairman was Dunlop. So coming quite close to the Goethe Annum, isn't it? And also very interesting, his opening speech, this is quoted quite often, that world or the the economy is no more a matter of fact for an individual nation. We have a worldwide economy, and the problems can all only be solved by an international, over the national separations, coming solutions. And also the quote is in Salvatore Lavecchia's article in the little booklet, that he said, what we see, and this is so modern, we see is an atmosphere of fear. People are living in an atmosphere of fear because this enormous technology, the robots will come, the mechanical robots. They did not talk about artificial intelligence, but they saw it, and they will master the world. And this creates an atmosphere of fear. And there he said, what we need against this terrifying concept, terrifying for many people, is a need for cultivation of a free and independent cultural educational life. We need schools and universities independent. And he said it in Switzerland, and said in Switzerland, you have a long tradition of universities and good spiritual life. And so I don't know how it was for him to be so close to Goethe-Anum, knowing about absolutely what is going on here, but being there in Basel, in the middle of this international group, very powerful people, but not powerful in the sense of Davos. They were not the statesmen and the big industry. It was in Dunlop's vision, as far as I understood, this was only industry, and he wanted, in the next step, as he said to Walter Johannes Stein, include the consumers, not the statesmen, not the politicians, but the sphere of economy. And he wanted to include their voices to create this new brotherhood of the future. The German press was happy because, again, German was an official language. They were so interested to be again part of the world. And in one of the German newspapers was also the sentence that in Basel there was a world parliament for the management of energy in 26. As early as in 26. The second huge international conference was unfortunately without Dunlop. He was already ill in 1930, and he could not come, but Ita Wegman wrote in a letter to him that his picture is in the newspapers, that your name is always mentioned with so much appreciation as the inaugurator. So by this letter, we see she was following the path, and he came then in autumn 1930 to another industrial meeting to Berlin, and it was in the big newspapers. The president of the World Power Conference is in Berlin. I mean, not John F. Kennedy or Robert Kennedy later in Corona, but let's say John F. But the president of the World Power Conference in Berlin. But in the same article, an interview with him, and he said Dunlop himself explained that it had been Rudolf Steiner's book, The Threefold Commonwealth, that had given rise to the decision to establish an alliance within his own field of work between certain cultural and spiritual forces of the world, be creating the World Power Conference. So publicly, in a time where anthroposophy was already in a bad situation in the main society, but he ignored. He said where it's from, he mentioned the book and the leading thoughts, and it's good to know that Dunlop's anthroposophical career was not at all hidden. He was the General Secretary of the Anthroposophical Society in Great Britain, officially after 29, unofficially since 25. It's a long topic, I would say, but he was part of the executive board in the public, and responsible also for Steiner House. And so this man was standing, I wouldn't say in two worlds, because he never accepted this abyss in between, but he was standing for, he was a representative, for what? For a new thinking, I would say, for the future. Wonderful also the sentence when he opened now an anthroposophical conference in 28, most of you will know, the World Conference on Spiritual Science and its practical applications. This was done by Dunlop as well. It was in London. 2,000 people, non-anthroposophists, came to listen to lectures, to see the presentations over 14 days. And they were all famous anthroposophical founders in medicine, in curative education, in agriculture. And in the opening lecture by Dunlop, he said, it is the soul that wakens and creates its brother soul. And he said many other wonderful things. He also said in 28, the heart of this conference is Rudolf Steiner. The heart of the conference in a spiritual approach. And Mr. Dunlop was acting as a chairman every morning to all the presentations. And but we shouldn't come into this mood of it's all wonderful, because he was not pleased with everything. And he said a lot of missed chances in these presentations. Let's say what all these lecturers did not have. It was a short synopsis of the lectures to hand out at the end, as brief, as concise, as simple as possible. And there was no any clear line of connection between, let's say, a toy factory. I mean, they presented toys, they presented music instruments, there were exhibitions, anthroposophical exhibitions, as you know them partly, and there were lectures. But where is the bridge in between, he said. There was not a clear line from those toys to the spiritual teaching. This is not in itself sufficiently obvious for correct estimation by a hurried and extremely practical-minded journalist to grasp. So we should think on the journalists. They need to grasp the essence. So better not to come to my lectures, but maybe there are better lectures where there is a clear message, and at the end, a synopsis. Thus, a great number of, he said, really splendid opportunities for sound and truthful publicity were entirely lost for lack of material prepared by the lecturers beforehand. So if we do such things, we should do it properly. And we can't continue is the self-illusion that we change the world, or we are the one who, or how do we come into the middle of the society if we are unable to present on a high level and also to organize that the messages have a chance to come to the journalists. They are not all enemies. Some of them, yes, but maybe not all. And also this wonderful sentence, quite often quoted since, but here is the English original verse. Dunlop said at the end of the conference, but I don't think publicly, but to his friends, if in some respects it may be true that we are not ready to bring anthroposophy before the public, that is not due to our lack of knowledge of the fundamentals of spiritual science, but to a lack of knowledge of the world. And the way to gain knowledge of the world is to rub shoulders with it and to refresh our memory of its language. So the problem is our world relationship, and not a relationship to the world, to anthroposophy, and there is the need to do something. So Ita Wegman was part of the World Conference and lived together with him in these 14 days, was one of the key lecturers, but not only her lectures, but also this being present there in the center of London. She wanted to have all her co-workers in the same hotel, saying we need to prepare every day. It's a very serious chance for anthroposophy. We are in the year 28. So she knew what Dunlop is doing on a so-called exoteric plan, and this is maybe exoteric esoteric, and at least there is a pure esoteric one. She knew about his activities, and she knew about his personality. This incredible man described by Crispin Villeneuve, by Thomas Mayer, and before best by George Adams, who knew him best, and also wonderful by Walter Johannes Stein, who was a co-worker in the World Power Conference. A man full of initiative, with a unique, straightforward will, but combined with an incredible patience. A man who could wait, as Dr. Steiner could, for a long time. My feeling is after the First World War, there was no more time to wait. Then we see the hurry-up years, the apocalyptic years of Steiner from 1919 until 24, and the culmination was in September 24 next week. We will focus on it to the last address on the 28th. This was the culmination of a dynamic trying to do the best in the last moment. But before, Steiner had also this long breath. And Dunlop was a very wise man, had kind of an inner faith, knowing what has to be done and then seeing. I think it was George Adams who said he had a spark of the absolute fire in himself. A spark of the absolute fire, and Ita Wegman realized it. She saw him as a chairman. This was also wonderful to see him sitting there with tact, humor. Somebody said it was David Clement who said it was Jupiter, Jove, sitting in a group. Jupiter himself, let's say. Kind, humorous, all wise, said David Clement. Hauschka, who was also an entrepreneur, we know Wala's success. He was a good man with economy and an excellent researcher in pharmacy. Hauschka said, who was also collaborating partly with Dunlop, he lived in a sphere of love. Incredible, a substance of love in his relations. And therefore he was able to show this principle of fraternity permeating life of economy in the future. I mean, there are a lot of anthroposophists talking about it since 1919, but some of them, they are not creating the atmosphere where it can grow. So Dunlop was not giving enormous speeches. He enabled the thing to come. He awakened the other one. It's one of his big capacities, and Ita Wegman saw it in him, that he was able to awaken the free being in the counterpart. And they became initiative. This is interesting, who was brought to him, to Great Britain. A lot of people who really at the end made it fruitful. All invited by Dunlop to encourage the other one. And he stopped publishing books. He was an excellent writer, I have to say, but he stopped publishing books in 1920, his last book, I will come to it. And he also stopped more or less in lecturing. And he said to Walter Stein to explain, I forbade myself to speak or write anymore because I found that it was my great task to put people into the right place. To put people into the right place. Instead of being a writer, an author, a lecturer, quite often he made only the summary at the end of the conference. As Willem Seilmans, Reinhard will know from the Netherlands, Daniel van Bemmelen knew very well that Seilmans was the head of a conference and the other ones gave the lectures, and at the end he made a summary and brought it to the essence. They had a close relationship, but there are no more letters as far as I can see, but they were really befriended. Willem Seilmans and Daniel Dunlop, and I can't say the same level, spiritual level, I can't compare, but both of them were enormously developed. The thing with Adams, this is what Thomas Meyer wrote in a wonderful way, is also interesting. George Adams, we know him very well as an enormous gifted mathematician for the periphery. This insight that the life forces and the mystery of the life forces has a lot to do not with the center but with periphery. This whole thinking in point and circle, but mainly in circle. And Dunlop was really somebody living out of this. They belonged really together, those two human beings. Christ holds sway in this sphere. Back to Ita Wegman. She knew him very well, I said. And they've been together in Penman Mauer, organized by Dunlop. We talked a lot about it last year. This shift, we can also say, in the anthroposophical movement. No Christmas conference without Penman Mauer, and now Penman Mauer without Dunlop. It was his idea, his conference, and Steiner said it's the first conference where the esoteric core of anthroposophy was there. And this was an idea brought from Dunlop to Dr. Steiner when they met privately in autumn 22 in Wimbledon. It was the second meeting. The first was an official one in the anthroposophical gathering, and the second one, Steiner was in London and heard that Dunlop is ill and asked where. And he went to see him at home in Wimbledon, not on the tennis, Wimbledon is bigger than, anyway. In Germany with Boris Becker, Wimbledon is only, but it's a long time ago with Boris, it's also went another way. So he went home to Wimbledon home, and in this first conversation in an intimate space, Dunlop proposed to do at least two main things in the future: summer conference deepening the core of anthroposophy, and world conference in the capitals, the European capitals, and starting, or maybe worldwide capitals, and starting in London. That's what he did in 28, delayed, because Steiner has gone. And the summer conferences started in Penman Mauer, and then went on in Torquay, and then went on in Gerloch, and Ita Wegman was always part of it. So she knew him very well from these summer conferences. They have been back together with Steiner in Tintagel, you know, this very important spot for Dr. Steiner, and in London. And also when Steiner died, London, it is the main direction of Ita Wegman, I have to say, which is maybe astonishing. But London, most often she was in London. It's the way to the west. Northwest maybe, but also the bridge to the United States of America. And George Adams said once to Jean Gallagly and Jean to me that George Adams already had 2 ship tickets for Steiner and Wegman for the United States. So Steiner asked him to buy the tickets in advance, cheaper. So that's what Adam said to Gallagher. I don't know, we never found them in the archive, but the way to the West. But also in itself, the Commonwealth, London, Great Britain, it meant a lot for Ita Wegman and the possibilities. We saw it the last few years also in the educational section of the Goetheanum, that there was enormous shift from Steiner's lectures about education here in Switzerland and Germany, and then he went to England. And this conference in Oxford, this conference in Ilkley, they had a world horizon. And he was speaking not only to the English people, but to the English-speaking people. So I think in Oxford, in the Manchester College, there were people of 20 nations there when Steiner gave this prominent course. So in a way, also Great Britain was at this time a kind of facilitator to the whole world. So for Ita Wegman, it was clear, if we have success in London, then anthroposophy has a chance to come in the English-speaking worldwide community or reality. So she was close to him, and she kept a relation after Dr. Steiner died, and she kept him also as a patient, not keeping him, but he was very sensitive in his organism. And so I mentioned that the first letter is as a patient in autumn 22, and the last pass to him was to the hospital. So for her, he was never a medical case in a stronger sense, but taking care for him as she took care for Dr. Steiner. Wonderful letters also of taking care for yourself. We still need you very, very much. Sometimes she sent doctors to him when she couldn't come by herself. She took him to Den Haag in the clinic of Seilmans when he was severely ill, and it was too far to go to Arlesheim, but at least once he was staying also in the clinic of Arlesheim. I didn't want to create an image of a patient. He was not chronically ill, but very sensitive in his organism. She made also funny things. Once she said, you know, I'll come to Great Britain with our Maybach car. Maybach was not a Fiat Cinquecento, it was quite a different type of car, and Ita Wegman had one. And she said, we bring it over to Great Britain, and then we will do a tour with Dame Florence. Dame is not the English translation of Dame, it is an English title. So Florence Simpson was upper class, and she went on to this tour, and they invited Dunlop to accompany them. It will be good that all people in the province will meet you. So a tour, and there are wonderful photographs. This book is not only about death masks. The book lying there is a photographic book about Ita Wegman, German-English. We did 2 years ago, I think, showing the cosmopolitan horizon of Ita Wegman, and there are some photographs of Dunlop and also of the Maybach and the car tour. I don't know if he took part and had time with these ladies to go. And once she really wanted him to come to Germany. And it was a very difficult situation. It became more and more difficult from year to year. And I mean, the Nazi party, we always associate them with 33. Then, okay, Hitler became the chancellor. But in 31, they had a huge success. And for Ita Wegman, since the beginning of the 30s, it was clear they will come if there is no radical change in new thoughts. And in 31, in late autumn, she had the idea there must be a very public thing now. And Jules Sauerwein came, accompanying the French ministers, this famous journalist from Le Matin, who was an anthroposophist. And she wanted to connect Sauerwein and Dunlop with high-ranking people in German politics, and she wanted to have him really. He said, no, I can't come. This was a riddle of Daniel Dunlop, that sometimes he wasn't there. You know it from the Christmas conference, probably, that Steiner asked people, where is Mr. Dunlop? He wasn't there. Steiner could not believe that he did not come after Penman Maurer, and all prepared with him for the next step in the evolution of the Anthroposophical Movement Society and School for Spiritual Science. And he wasn't there. Eleanor Mary had to say to Steiner that he could not come, but it was on the 13th of December. Until then, Steiner asked people, where is Dr. Dunlop? Now you can see clairvoyant. Steiner can see him sitting in Wembley, or it was Chelsea at this time, but this is not the point here. Where is Dr. Dunlop? Not doctor, but Mr. Dunlop. So sometimes he was not easy to grasp. So he said no to come to Berlin, but later on I found a correspondence that he obviously came in the last moment. It is a little bit a strange correspondence, because she reminded him on the wonderful time they had in the hotel and in the museum. But of course there were no tourists. So the main point was not the hotel and the museum. I don't know if it was a hidden language, but he came. He came. Yeah, I will come back a little bit, 15 minutes, to this 33 in Germany. But now I want to have a little look to the correspondence, but very shortly. I can say there are two major subjects. Two major subjects in the correspondence. And the first one is medicine and Veleda. And the second one is the Anthroposophical Society. And I make it very short now. And then we come to the last point, and we end in time. This will be Rudolf Steiner and the link in between Wegman and Dunlop. Medicine, just to say that Steiner asked Dunlop to be the representative of the medical movement and also of the factory or the dependance of the Veleda, which should be founded in London, the Veleda London. He should be the head of, and he said yes. And also he should be the one who brings the book of Steiner Wegman, Fundamentals of Therapy, to the British public with a translation, but also with, and he said, yes, I will do for sure. He had a very wonderful relation to medicine. To be honest, this is the last book he published in 1920, in the year of the first medical course. The book is not about medicine, it's about elementary beings in nature and human body. And it is astonishing what this Dunlop knows about, not in general that there are elementary spirits, but how they act specifically in the organs of the human body. And also saying medicine is as long knows science as the pharmacists ignore in collecting the healing plants the exact time concerning these elementary beings. Until then, medicine is no science. It's an enormous book. So I just mentioned the theme. He was deeply interested. She said the voice behind nature. He was a person really knowing about nature, also in the sense of natura, Persephone, the mysteries. I come back to the end, at the end. And he asked Dunlop, I think from a double aspect. He was a person able to bring an impulse to the big audience, London, Harley Street. This was the famous medical street in London where all these famous doctors had their office. But not only practical doctors, but also science of medicine, oncology, cancer research institute. First thing he wanted to do is a good publication to bring into Lancet about mistletoe, into Lancet. And also interesting, he ordered a Lancet journal for Ita Wegman, so it came weekly to Arlesheim. You should be on the top of actual research in cancer strivings. And so this was the outer aspect. And the inner aspect is deep relationship to substances, to nature. Now it would be a long theme, but if not getting here luciferic, we have to say it did not function. And this is one also of the riddles of the anthroposophical history. We shouldn't overestimate the path. It did not function. There was never a Lancet article, and there was never a strong group of anthroposophical doctors in London. There was never a clinic opened, which was intended by Dunlop and Wegman. It did not work. And the Veleda drugs were too expensive for the ordinary people, also because of the taxes they had to pay in traveling, and many other factors. It was a riddle for Ita Wegman and Dunlop that they did not come to a real success. They kept it going until today. And Ita Wegman opened a kind of what we call a kind of dépendance. Kent Terrace, if you ever are at the Steiner House, London, don't forget to go 10 minutes walk further, is Ita Wegman's Kent Terrace, an enormous house, but she rented apartments, and it was never what we call a clinic. I mean, some doctors came there and saw patients. I don't want to minimize it, but we shouldn't make it a huge thing. Even Dunlop, even Wegman were not able to have a breakthrough, at least on a physical plan. We can say spiritually it's the opposite, maybe, but sometimes we need also successes in the public. So this is not a shadow over Daniel Dunlop and Ita Wegman, but it's reality. And we always, Dunlop was a person and Wegman connected to reality. We shouldn't overestimate ourselves, our possibilities, our successes. We should have a judgment which is adopting to reality. They kept it going, which is not bad, to be honest. I mean, it was not easy to do it. And when then the German persecution came, that means the Nazis, Ita Wegman helped a lot of the doctors, Jewish origin, König, Ludwig Engel, others, to escape to Great Britain. And the success was also that she opened 2 or 3 curative education homes, and they also took in refugees. So it was not nothing, but it was small. You know that Campilla or Karl König had the ability to make it in a way bigger, but it collapsed later on. Of course, Ruskin Mill now is the big hope. And the genius is here in the room. So, but all in all, it is a long story, anthroposophy in England, but not England itself. England as a step to not only the Western world, and so it was of main importance, and to a certain extent it worked, so, but not as helped. The second part of the correspondence is even sadder. This is the relationship to the Goetheanum. I would like to overjump it, but not completely. Thomas Meyer and others described it in detail, or we have even more details in the archive of Ita Wegman. How to judge it? In a way, such successful people as Dunlop with the World Conference in London, there is always an estimation, an emotion of concurrence. And there was a fear at the Goetheanum Hill that he's making a big world conference in London in summer, 28, and nobody will come to the opening of the second Goetheanum. So they were collecting all money to the Goetheanum and all people to the Goetheanum. And partly he felt regarded as an enemy. Partly he felt that they say he is weakening the center, not only with the World Conference, but also the year before when he made this third summer conference. This was not weakening the opening of the second building, but it was weakening the so-called English week. There was an English week every August, and some people came. And now he made a summer conference, and they said, it is against our English week. And he said, it has nothing to do with the English week, and I'm the first one to improve the relationship. But these summer courses intended with Steiner are important, and it was before the English week. So this mistrust against him. And this mistrust, if he is mainly an exoteric person, a businessman, World Power Conference, and that he is, as I mentioned, the people are coming to him instead to us. And then he has this relationship with Wegman and with Salmans. So those persons regarded as not true committed to the Goetheanum impulse, but they have their own reigns. And this is a long story then with Dunlop, and it ended up that he was excluded from the society in 1935. I mentioned 6 weeks before he died. This is from several aspects a very dramatic signature, but I don't want to go into the depth. And also there is a letter to Walter Johannes Stein when he's saying, if this goes on in the Goetheanum will be dead in a few years. It is not a living force even now, only a center for distributing forces of ill health. So it reversed in those years to the opposite. Of course, this was not the purpose of the leading fraction in the Vorstand, but the end result was that people as Kolisko, Seilmans, Dunlop were excluded, and their whole national societies, 2,000 people. And it happened in 1935. That means in the middle of a time where evil was completely there. And now I finish with Ita Wegman, Steiner, and Dunlop. The strongest affinity in between Wegman and Dunlop, I think, was this being at home in the mysteries. First of all, the old mysteries. Steiner said about Dunlop, he's at home in all old mysteries, which is a little bit too much. But he said it to Eleanor Mary, and he was really excellent in cosmic knowledge. But he said, I'm a student, of course. I had always longed to hear of the cosmic mysteries connected with Christ and his incarnation. But he was knowing, absolutely. He kept it inside. I mentioned the relationship to the human body. But he had this background, obviously, to Eleanor Mary, which was a strong companion of, not the wife, but a strong companion of Dunlop. Dr. Steiner once also said he belonged to the inner circle of the Templar Knights, the inner circle. This is maybe also a trace. Thomas Meyer worked on it. So he was somebody of the past, but he was so incredibly modern. As Nathaniel said, that we'll get to catch the ideas 100 years later. So he handled the present and the future. So this was his main interest, the mysteries of the future. And therefore the World Conference. He didn't go to Penman Maurer for the Druids in the past, only as a background. for what has happened today. And he knew about evil. Because if you hear Penman Maurer, and this is all our longing about the mysteries and the landscape, and we feel quite well. But Dunlop was a person knowing about evil also. And this was also the best letters from Ita Wegman about the Nazi regime went to Dunlop. Now the time is out to quote them in length. But when she analyzed in April 1933 what will come now over Europe, ending in a Second World War, this is Dunlop. And probably she had to write, I don't know, sometimes they phoned, which is also a problem for the persons working in archives because they have no phone protocols. So we only have documents of letters, but they phoned and they saw each other. But one of the topics was also evil. And what we will do now, at the end of Wegman's letter, what shall we behave? And that belongs also to our task. Otherwise, anthroposophy would have no real meaning if we adore anthroposophy only for our own interests. How shall we work that we might perhaps prevent something by taking the right place and doing the right deeds? So to work in the time of, I don't want to say Surat, but in a way heading the coming. And after Dr. Steiner's death, Dr. Daniel Dunlop in the article in 25 said, don't think that the negative forces against anthroposophy are becoming silent now. They will grow and grow. And the strongest lectures about Ahriman fighting against anthroposophy Steiner gave in London, especially in the year 22, before the destruction of the Goetheanum. We made several lectures in 22 here, 100 years ago, to the English friends to make consciousness that he brought it to England, especially to London, this Ahriman power, also against the building here. So just to say, he was well aware of it, but it doesn't hinder him. He never attached to this atmosphere of fear, but now we have to do the right things and to prepare the right things. And Wegman and Dunlop to come to the end. In the middle, but maybe not from a spatial perspective, was Dr. Steiner. In one letter, Ita Wegman wrote, I'm not only connected to you personally, but also through Rudolf Steiner. Of course, other people were connected to Steiner, from Maid Mary and to Mary Steiner, but now our theme is this relationship. And she knew about Dr. Steiner's absolute relationship to Dunlop. From the beginning of the first meeting, it was very surprising, and Dunlop reported it, that they met each other first time in spring 22. Dunlop was since 12 years studying Steiner's writings, but wanted to see him in person. He said, we Western people want to see with our own eyes. And then this reality of this first encounter, the human relationship, he said, was established immediately. A clasp of the hand, which lasted for many minutes. A conversation which, while it took its course in ordinary language, we wonder which language, but maybe English, seemed to lie in the realm of understanding infinitely deeper, and was filled with an indescribable sweetness and warmth. I felt as through this meeting had been of the nature of a reunion after years, maybe lives, of wandering and seeking. I came away from the first meeting and from others with my heart on fire, with thankfulness that the quest has found fulfillment. Now it's not the time, but maybe you'll read again the text from Dunlop, looking back to Steiner. It's a text from 35, the year when he went to the spiritual world. And Ita Wegman said at the funeral address, no later in this little meeting, Steiner is collecting those who are needed now. I think it was also in the spiritual world an extreme year, 35, 33, and what happened and what started. So how to go on in the spiritual world, maybe he needed such companions. And yeah, I summarize it all now at the end with maybe a last element of Dunlop. This is duty. He said, duty, what is duty? Crystallized karma. Crystallized karma. And I work for Dr. Steiner, and this is karma. The inspirer of the 20th century has lived among us and lives among us still. It is not for us to work as laborers unto harvest. We are working unto harvest, or this is no sacrifice. He didn't like the word sacrifice, so often used in anthroposophical realms. He said, for those of us who knew and loved Steiner, there can be no talk of sacrifices in our labors for anthroposophy. There can only be joy that at least our karma has enabled us to further Rudolf Steiner's work to some small degree. Joy and duty, crystallized karma. He said, I wanted to free the understanding of duty from this pious atmosphere. It is so often associated, duty, with a kind of pious atmosphere, and I want to restore an ancient inspiration which saw in the daily round of tasks accomplished the fulfillment of divine law. Dunlop, he knew what he had to do, and he followed this divine law. And some of you will know from Thomas Meyer book and from other sources, I have it from Ita Wegman archive, the prayer, the morning prayer of Daniel Dunlop. He gave it also to Ita Wegman. It's a morning prayer written by himself. He was a poet, but also a wise man. And I only want to have quoting and ending with the second part. This is partly about duty. And this will be the ending words of my presentation. Okay, 5 minutes too long, but hopefully giving an impression and hopefully no more shot for the death mask, but getting a feeling for a relationship. I wouldn't say a personal, it is a relationship to the spirit, isn't it? To anthroposophy, but it also means to the need of our time and the coming future. So the second part of the morning prayer from Dunlop. Thou, you have made me an immortal soul. Give me the courage of one who is immortal. Help me to bless by word or look or deed all whom I shall meet this day, and to give them of that same love thou givest me. Though you are the heart of love, bless me with love. Though you are the great servant, teach me to serve. Though you didst create me, keep me by that same power, strong, self-giving, sane. Again, thank you, the organizers of the conference, for your decision to create it and also the decision to integrate Daniel Dunlop here on the Hill. It's so needed And it is time also in 24, 25, and in so forth. Thank you, and thank you all, and have a very rich time together.